I don't know how you do it, Peter King. I don't know how you do it on deadline. I don't know how you pop all that stuff out like that. It's amazing. And you're back at your keyboard, back on the Rich Eisen show. How are you, Peter?
Hey, Rich. Well, when you've done something like that for 20 years, you kind of get the hang of it. I might say the same thing about you and all the wickets that you occupy every week. So I was really happy that you wrote that. In part, I mean, I don't know if anybody out here recalls precisely how you did that column. They should, but what was really cool about it is that you took us into the meeting that Al Riveron had with all of the NFL Network family and NFL.com family in California a few weeks ago. And I thought it was really, really interesting because I think you raised a question that is at the heart of the pass interference dilemma as we move into at least a one-year period, because I'm not sure it's going to last any longer than 1 year, honestly. We are going to have a one-year experimental period where pass interference, both called and non-called, for the first 28 minutes of each half is going to be eligible for coaches' challenges. And as you wrote very, very well and insightfully, that when Riveron would put up plays on the big screen, that some people in the room thought, yeah, interference. No, it wasn't interference. So that's what is going to have to be determined when they go to replay review.
Well, the issue, Peter, is that there's always the, if you will, unintended consequence. The intention for this rule was to create a safety net that will prevent the NFC Championship game from ever happening again, and I totally agreed with that, and I think it's necessary to weave that safety net after what we saw last year. But the unintended consequence is just like anything else that's reviewable. Once the review process starts, anything that is allowed to be reviewed is, in fact, reviewed, in the process. So that means every time, that you're looking for offensive pass interference because a booth has buzzed in or a flag has been thrown for it, defensive pass interference is now going to be looked at as well, and vice versa. And I'm thinking that might be the tweak here, Peter, is that understanding that every time you open up replay, everything that's reviewable can be reviewed. Maybe we exempt pass interference from that category. Otherwise, you might get offsetting penalties every damn time, and it's going to be really upsetting and confusing to a lot of fans.
Look, I asked Al Riveron directly, Rich, are you worried about a spate of offsetting penalties?
Right.
Because essentially, I think if you examine replay, and listen, Rich, over the weekend, I'm just telling you, this was what, because I asked a bunch of people, what are the things you're worried about with this? And listen to the response of one coach. He said, listen, I want to raise this point that we've been talking about. And that is that what happens when away from the play, maybe not all the way across the field, but what happens if in the slot, after a winning touchdown is scored right at the end of a game, and they even go to booth review, okay, what happens if the slot receiver, let's see, the tight end is in the slot, okay, and he pushes off the safety, clearly pushes off when the ball is in the air. But it had nothing to do with the play. What are they going to do? And, that is going to be a big, big test. Because if you are going to call pass interference by the letter of the law, you're supposed to call pass interference even if it is not with the two guys where the ball is intended for. So that's going to be another issue here.
Yeah, I think that this may be something similar, Peter, to, if you remember a couple of years ago, that the way that in the first year after Dean Blandino had left and Al Riveron, the new still head of NFL refs, came in, that replay looked at whether it was catch, not a catch, in a way that was different than the way Blandino would call it. Like, basically, they're going to stay with the ruling on the field 99 out of 100 times, but instead they started Zapruder filming this thing was the ball moving a little bit. Let's be totally literal about it. Let's parse it out. And if you remember, Kelvin Benjamin had a touchdown in New England for the Bills called back.
That was the worst call in the history of replay.
Right, and then they changed. They basically changed the way that they reviewed it for the playoffs, and that came into being for a touchdown for the Eagles. Where Clement caught one, we're kind of juggling it a little bit in the end zone. And obviously the Zach Ertz plays too. That they definitely changed the way they reviewed it. Maybe, and they did the same thing with roughing the passer last year. Maybe they have a similar epiphany midseason this year, even though it's not the best idea to go about it that way.
Look, Rich, that's what happens. You saw what happened. You saw what happened last year when during the preseason. And I forget the numbers on this, but I bet there were 50 or 60, leading with the crown of the helmet.
Right.
Calls made. And we all thought, everybody's hands were ringing from coast to coast, that how can you play football like this, blah, blah, blah. And the season started, and they never called it.
That's right.
They cried wolf. The officiating department cried wolf on that last year. I asked Riveron about that too, and he said, no. Players learned, and they were good. And there's no question that players were better. But by the letter of the law, they missed 50 of those calls last year, and all of which were called in the preseason. So, again, I have no idea how this is going to be called, but this just strikes me. Rich, let's fast forward to the league meetings in Florida late next March. And I don't know where they'll be, Orlando, Palm Beach, somewhere. But let's fast forward to those. Can you get 24 of the 32 NFL owners to agree that this replay thing was a good idea, with pass interference? Now, we'll see. There's a lot of things that can happen and will happen between now and then. But I'll just say this. I think of all these things that have ever been passed as one-year experiments, more than any of them, because replay back in the 90s and even more recently was passed as a one-year experiment with different things. And in my opinion, this is the one that is the most endangered of those species, that I think after 1 year, this has a good chance to disappear.
For more of The Rich Eisen Show, tune to Audience Channel 239 on DirecTV for free on BR Live or download The Rich Eisen Show app.